Vladimir Putin was born on October 7, 1952. Less than a year later, the leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, died at a dacha near Moscow. Stalin's death caused a split and a struggle for power among the USSR party elite. The party leaders at the time were Georgy Malenkov, Lavrentiy Beria, Nikolai Bulganin, and Nikita Khrushchev. They decided to split power between them. Not surprisingly, disagreements began to pop up. Party and state leaders feared Beria, the head of the powerful state security service. They believed he would declare himself the heir to Stalin and continue his policy of repression. As a result, in June 1953, Khrushchev and the other two party leaders staged a coup with the support of senior officers of the Red Army. Beria was arrested while in the Kremlin. He was taken to a bunker in the Moscow military district and after a short trial, was executed. Georgy Malenkov became the first formal head of state. However, Khrushchev, as head of the Communist Party, held the real power. Malenkov tried to carry out economic reforms, but ran into resistance from the party apparatus and from Khrushchev himself. Khrushchev went on to increase his power and sphere of influence. In 1956, he spoke at the Congress of the Communist Party, sharply criticizing Stalin. He made the first public acknowledgments of Stalin's mass repression and toxic cult of personality. In 1957, a group of old party leaders, led by Malenkov, supporters of the old Stalinist line, tried to oust Khrushchev, but failed. This was the end of Malenkov's power. He was relieved of his post and sent into exile. On the international stage, Khrushchev met with a number of Western leaders to show off how different he was from aggressive Stalin. He succeeded, and on June 4, 1961, in Vienna, Khrushchev met with President Kennedy. This meeting helped start a decrease in tensions between the USSR and the United States. Back home, Khrushchev's paranoia was growing. Anybody he saw as a threat was expelled from the party. Publicly, he continued to support a thaw between the USSR and the West, and continued his criticism of Stalin's repressions. He pushed for amnesty for those repressed years earlier. Inside the party, a conspiracy arose against Khrushchev by those dissatisfied with excessive democratization and the curtailment of their power. At the head of the conspiracy was Leonid Brezhnev, Khrushchev's prodigy. On October 14, 1964, at a meeting of the Central Committee, Khrushchev was removed from all posts by a general vote while he was on vacation. Khrushchev was met at Vnukovo Airport upon his return, informed of his ouster, and told not to resist. Khrushchev was forced to agree to a voluntary retirement. The newspaper said it was because of his advanced age and poor health. Leonid Brezhnev came to power and would rule the USSR for 18 years. He championed a return to the Leninist principles of collective leadership. The beginning of Brezhnev's term coincided with a period of relative prosperity, due entirely to the reforms made before he even came into power. He took the credit, of course, and his popularity soared. Brezhnev started getting rid of Khrushchev's henchmen, replacing them with his own nominees. These lucky few served for 20 to 30 years, cementing the new concept that some public figures are irreplaceable. It led to a new system inside the party called personal trust, making it impossible for new people to get promoted to high posts. Corruption was evolving, reforms were ignored, and the practice of self-enrichment became the norm. An era of stagnation began in domestic life. The economy was stable, but there was no sign of progress on the social front. Human rights activists, unlike in Stalin's times, were not shot, but they were either exiled abroad or placed in psychiatric hospitals. The KGB switched its focus to strengthening its control over public opinion. In the early 1980s, things started to change. A drop in fuel prices decimated the country's already fragile economy, and people's standard of living began to deteriorate. It was clear the aged elite of the party could not effectively govern the country. Young people demanded reforms, but the party could not and did not want to change anything. On November 10, 1982, Leonid Brezhnev died. Despite all the negative press, people remembered Brezhnev's time as stable, relatively peaceful, and even prosperous. 2 days later, Yuri Andropov became the head of state. He'd been the head of the KGB for the last 15 years, and it was under his leadership that the KGB systematically intervened in literally every sphere of Soviet life. He created a system of snitches and special departments who informed KGB officers about people's actions and conversations. Andropov replaced Brezhnev's people with his own in the name of fighting corruption. It was nothing more than a classic power play. His main policy goal was the fight against corruption inside the party-state apparatus, allegedly to improve economic efficiency. However, just 10 months into his rule, Andropov's health deteriorated sharply. He had contracted chickenpox in Afghanistan 3 years earlier. That left his kidneys and eyes severely weakened. Andropov died 8 months later. On February 13, 1984, Konstantin Chernenko was unanimously elected as General Secretary, but like his predecessor, he had poor health and died less than a month after taking the post. He was succeeded by a young Andropov protege, Mikhail Gorbachev. He was 56 when he took over as General Secretary. Following Andropov's example, Gorbachev announced new economic reforms and championed freedom of speech. The reforms did not have any real effect, mostly because the country's economy was too broken to just patch up. Living standards continued to fall. The black market flourished and food shortages due to poor management became the norm. Society started demanding change. The young democratic forces of Russia, the reformist wing of the party, quickly became disillusioned with Gorbachev. They saw him as a weak, non-effective leader. A new figure arose, the Minister of Construction and the chairman of the Moscow Party Committee, Boris Yeltsin. He quickly gained popularity by portraying himself as a man of the people. He used public transportation and often chatted with fellow passengers. No other politician of his level had ever done anything like this. A split began to open up in the Soviet parliament between the supporters of Gorbachev and Yeltsin. After electoral law reforms that allowed independent candidates to run in elections, Yeltsin was elected as a deputy. The year was 1991. Soon after, he became the first president of the Russian Soviet Republic, a brand new position within the Soviet Union. Gorbachev was still head of the USSR at the time. Gorbachev's party elite sympathizers were worried about Yeltsin's increasing popularity and democracy in general. They decided to act. Troops were sent into Moscow and St. Petersburg. But Yeltsin was able to mobilize his supporters. They came out onto the streets and prevented a military coup. The army, seeing such massive crowds, promptly switched sides. Gorbachev had completely lost his popularity and legitimacy. Yeltsin provided a blueprint for regional power within the USSR. The heads of Ukraine and Belarus were quick to take notice. On December 25, 1991, they met secretly with Yeltsin and signed the agreement of the abolition of the USSR. Each republic was transformed into an independent state with its own laws and government. After the collapse of the USSR, the population of Russia faced difficult challenges. The economy was in ruins, inflation reached 4,000%, and incomes fell sharply. The popularity of President Yeltsin never cracked 3%. The country was in ruins. Poverty, corruption, and organized crime ruled over everyday life. At the same time, in Moscow, a new split began to form, this time among the new democratic forces. They were split between the supporters of President Yeltsin and the chairman of the parliament, Hasbulatov. The conflict lasted until the fall of 1993, when a rift between the branches of Russian government nearly broke out into civil war. Yeltsin triumphed, and a new constitution was adopted, emphasizing strong presidential power. 5 years later, Parliament tried to impeach President Yeltsin, unsuccessfully. That same year, Yeltsin's health started taking center stage. He suffered a heart attack and had heart surgery shortly after. He retreated into a largely ceremonial role, while the country was effectively run by his close inner circle. By 1998, the economic crisis was so bad that Russia had to devalue its currency and default on its debts. People began to go out into the streets en masse. It became clear that Russians were fed up and wanted a change at the top. Yeltsin's inner circle searched for candidates, eventually landing on the young Vladimir Putin, who became president in 2000. The story of Putin and his rise to power deserves a separate video. Coming soon!